Hello and welcome to Turning Point Tactics, the competitive Kill Team 40k podcast and YouTube channel focused on giving you the strategies and tactics to siege initiative every turning point. I'm your host Ryan and I'm here to help give you tips and tricks to elevate every part of your Kill Team experience. So no matter if you're a casual or competitive player, there should be something here for you. Ultimately, the goal for all of us is to become better opponents and have more fun in the game, and Turning Point Tactics is here to help you do exactly that. Before we begin, I want to give a massive shout out to my patrons. You guys are incredible and I hugely appreciate the support you give me. If not for the support of the patrons, the channel simply wouldn't be what it is. If you too are interested in supporting the channel, there's a few ways you can go about doing so. Firstly, you too can join the Patreon, where you'll get exclusive access to the Discord, Patreon priority questions, early access to content, exclusive content and tournament rewards. Secondly, if you find yourself buying Kill Team goodies or hobby supplies, you can use our affiliate links. This means with every purchase you make, a little bit comes to the channel. It'll cost you nothing, but help keep us and the show going. Finally, you can always support for free without spending a penny. It's as simple as hitting the subscribe button, liking the video, and sharing amongst your local community. Telling your friends about us is a great way to connect the communities together, share lessons, and help elevate everyone's game. As always, we're keen to hear your thoughts and feedback, so don't leave that comment box empty. Let us know what you think, maybe we've missed something, or maybe you have a better strategy. Drop a comment and let us know. Once again, thank you for your support. With all that said, let's get into it. Alrighty, hello everyone. It has been a little while since I've done an episode. I say it's been like a week or so, but I owe some Patreon priority questions. I started doing them, I got like one deep, and then I ended up spending like an hour talking about one question, and I realised I didn't do the rest of them. So here I am. We're going to do some Patreon priority questions on tonight's episode. I'm also going to just cover off a few of the other exciting bits that I think are going on at the moment. So obviously we have Kill Team Nightmare arriving at the weekend, which is pretty exciting. And we've got to see some of the key rules and interactions between the two teams in one of the Warhammer battle reports, which I do think is worth touching on. So the structure of this is, first we're going to talk about Night Lords and Mandrakes, and then we're going to get into some Patreon priority questions, hopefully covering off all the ones that are outstanding, so I can put up a new list of fresh questions for the patrons, and I'll get round to doing that hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Alright, so firstly, let's talk about Night Lords and Mandrakes, and the question that I think everyone wants to know: are they broken? Right, so because a lot of people, when they've seen the battle report, their immediate response is, that looks really, really strong. So I guess it's probably worth, for those of you who don't have Warhammer Plus and haven't already seen the battle report, is just to talk through, I guess, some of the abilities that have been showcased and look to see what they've been showing off at this point. So I'm just going to read out some of the rules, and then we'll sort of talk through how impactful they could be for a lot of these teams, right? So firstly, we have In Midnight Clad, and this is the faction rule for the Night Lords, right? So when determining if a friendly Nemesis Core operative is in an enemy operative's line of sight, that friendly operative is obscured if all of the following are true. So the first thing is you have to make all of these points true. It's not just one of them, so there is some benefits to this. So firstly, you have to be on conceal. Next, you have to be within 1 inch or a black triangle of heavy terrain or light terrain, and or any part of its base is underneath a vantage point. Well, that seems actually pretty easy to achieve. You should do that on most maps. And it is more than red from enemy operatives it is visible to. Alright, so that's quite interesting because there is now some counterplay to this. If you want to set up a long range shot, you could potentially move someone further up the board to remove that obscurity effect, and then have that option. I think where this is going to be really impactful, personally, is Turning Point 1, stopping being like alpha struck, because a lot of teams, they don't have the ability to immediately remove obscurity. Normally it's like a combo effect, so I'm going to do one thing and then the next thing's going to happen. So for instance, like Hearthkin now with the new change to locator, they spend an AP, they put down their ignore obscurity, so you're going to have a chance to respond, and you're only 6 models, right? So you've got a bit of chance to play around this. Kazakin have the recon trooper, etc, etc. So there are some teams that can do it, a single activation like Intercession, but most teams I think are going to struggle to be able to take this away from you. And note that like this is just adding to your layers of defensive bonuses, but for an elite team in general, I I think this is really going to help you on turning point 1, where you probably don't want to be losing models that you weren't necessarily expecting to lose from a sort of long range shot, right? So that is, for an elite team, I think a really strong ability. It's probably not the strongest of abilities. Like, I think I'd say some of the legionary sort of marks of chaos are probably better, but it's not bad. Alright, we have a tactical ploy here, which is use this tactical ploy into your scouting step. One friendly nemesis claw operative hold within your drop zone from a free normal move action up to 4 inches as though it can fly. This is really nice. So the reason why this is nice is this can give you very easy access to a vantage point early on, right, for one of your gunners, if you wanted to be able to have the option to be able to flip your gunner, or it can set up a long range charge from one of your melee models people might necessarily be seeing coming, which is quite good. So a whole bunch of utility in that. You might not use it all the time, you might use it sometimes, and note that you could also use this potentially in like Into the Dark to be able to get you moving forwards and open doors that otherwise might be out of your reach. So generically, quite a nice utility tactical ploy there. Next one we have is Nightmare Manifest, and this lets you do 2 fight actions or 2 shoot actions, so long as a bolt action is selected. In this ploy, it notes that they've got a bolt gun and heavy bolter, so I assume there's going to be some long range options for the Night Lords there. This is just generically good against hordes if you want to increase your output of damage. It's a perfect ploy that you want. What's really good about this is for CP efficiency is this lets you do both the 2 fights or 2 shoots, not having to choose. So Legionary have to choose between, do I want to be spending CP on fighting twice or spending CP on shooting twice? This just lets you do both. So in comparison to the Legionary's equivalent ploy, this is just straight up stronger, right? It's far more CP efficient, which is good. That's what you want to be able to see. The next one I have here is a strategic ploy called Prey Sight. Until the end of the turning point, when determining line of sight for each friendly nemesis cooperative, enemy operatives within 6 inches of it are treated as having an engage order unless they're in cover from heavy terrain. This is really good. So this is particularly good on Into the Dark, and the reason why I think it's particularly good on Into the Dark is because a lot of the objectives in Into the Dark are only ever protected by light terrain, i.e. your own barricades which you place down, not the heavy terrain. I know the doorways and hatchways, themselves are heavy, but the objectives themselves are on light terrain, or protected by light terrain. Cool. Why does this matter? Well, let's say you were to put a gunner in that room and you go on guard. One of the issues that people normally have is either you stick your gunner like next to the barricade, which is usually in the middle of the room, and you get shot with non-reciprocal, and then you're sort of hurting for trouble there or whatever, or you stick them in a place where you're in a corner of a room on guard, and therefore your enemy has to cross the threshold so they're not obscured, they can't non-reciprocal you. But the common counter to that is, well, I'll just move on conceal behind the barricade, and then you can't see me. So now this gives like Nemesis Claw a really great way of getting around that, where they could just move into a room, go on guard, or if you're hiding on the middle, they can move in within 6 inches and just pick you up. So that's really strong. The equivalence of this we've seen in other teams in the past is the Inquisitorial Agents have a 4-inch range equivalence, but I think it works in heavy cover. So the fact this only works in light cover, I think is good. And is sort of consistent with what other things we've seen, but generically this is really strong. So this is going to, I think, really help them pick up those shooting kills, although we haven't seen too many other operatives from a shooting perspective, so maybe it's not as impactful as we first think. Alright, next, we have come for you. It's a strategic ploy. Until the end of the turning point, each time a friendly Nemesis operative is activated, if the first action it performs during that activation is the charge action, after it finishes that action, you can select one enemy operative within its engagement range to suffer D3 mortal wounds. Okay, I think this is more situational than we probably think it is. The way this will become impactful is if you have lots of power weapons with like lethal 5 and 6 damage, and you're fighting a 7 wound team, or if you have a it's all about breakpoints is what I'm trying to get at here. So you're averaging 2 mortal wounds on this, So if you have a 6 damage weapon and you're fighting an 8 wound team, that's going to be quite good. Or a 5 damage weapon and you're doing a 7 wound team, or whatever you have, right? So maybe they have loads of 4 damage weapons, and therefore chipping 2 mortal wounds off of, say, a Felgor or off of a Commando might make the difference between you being able to 2 hit them or 3 hit them, and that can save you a lot of damage in return. So that's kind of good. I would say it's going to depend on breakpoints though, so I'll be looking at that from a very, very specific point of view of, is this going to be relevant to like this breakpoint right now? Is this going to change this matchup, or is it just going to be something that I'm just doing unnecessary excess damage to, right? So maybe if they have other abilities to increase their damage, this is probably less impactful, but you never know. Okay, the next one we have is Prescience, which is the leader ability, which is once in each strategy phase, when it's your turn to use a strategic deployer class, you can use this ability instead. If you do, add D3 Prescience tokens to your pool. Your Prescience tokens are spent on unique actions. Some of the stuff we saw for that was like adding a CP and delaying an activation. So again, these did seem like quite strong abilities. I'll be interested to know what the full remit of abilities are for this, but from what we saw, they looked very powerful. I really like the being able to delay your activation by 1 ability, particularly in the Elite Mirror match. So if you're fighting a 6v6 match, just being able to, in Turning Point 1, get the last activation can be really significant. And that can, like, for a lot of these teams, that can really make a difference between setting up a double kill Turning Point 2 in your favour or not, or getting the swing on primary. So one of the things that, like, for instance, Legion really like to do is set their champ up where they can potentially, do a charge fight and then plasma pistol someone on an objective and loot it from you with their 4 APL, and that's like such an action efficient maneuver right at the start of Turning Point 2 that it usually, like, that one thing will win the game. So being able to just say, actually, I'm going to wait to see where you position your leader and make sure I spread out to deny you that charge or deny you that plasma shot could be really, really impactful. Also, just getting additional CP will be great for this team as well. So that looks really, really good, specifically for the Elite matchup. The next thing we have here is Vox Scream. So use this tactical ploy when your opponent would activate an enemy operative. Your opponent cannot activate that operative in this activation. If there are no other enemy operatives eligible to be activated, this tactical ploy has no effect. And then it's cost 1 digital command point each time you use it, going up. Alright, this is one of the strongest abilities I think you can have in an attack ploy, right? Because this directly lets you control the pace of the battle. So in the example I just gave, right? So your opponent's played an absolutely perfect turn 1, they've set their champ up and they're ready to do a double kill, and they go, I'm going to activate my champ because I won initiative and I'm going to charge and do all this, and before they get to say anything you just go, no, 1 CP, Vox Scream, deny that guy being able to activate right now, and it's only by 1, they can activate them in their next activation, but that then gives you a chance to then remove that model, do the damage, and really gain advantage. So Inquisition has something similar to this with Denounce, and their abilities to delay someone's activations by D3, but that's once per game. This is just a more expensive thing each time you use it, but I mean, this is great. This is particularly good against teams that are doing the initiative gamble against you. So I think there's certain teams that do the initiative gamble better, right? Such as Kazakin, because they can reroll, Star Striders, because they can reroll, the Pathfinders, because they can use their worthy cause and guarantee it. Novitiates can do sort of things playing off initiative. This won't stop that, but those teams that are trying to set up these sort of plays, just being able to say, nope, like, I know you want initiative, but you're not getting to do that this turn, is so good. And the fact it costs 1 CP is great. I like the fact it gets more expensive, because that would be, if this was just 1 CP all game, you'd use it every turning point. You might have to think about it now, but you do have ways to generate extra CP. So that looks really strong. Like, that looks really, really strong, and it's an ability I really like when it comes to competitive play, right? So just being able to control that initial turning point 2 first reactions is a very, very strong ability. So let's not pretend anything else. Okay, the next thing is the ability on the sort of. He looks like an icon bearer, but he's holding up like a dead Astartes. And the ability is disconcerting mimicry. It's a psychic action. Select one enemy operative within red of this operative, then select one of the following for that enemy operative, and you can only select each one once per battle. So you can subtract one from its APL, which is a straight nice thing to be able to do to nerf someone. Really good against sort of 2 APL melee teams, right? So things like your Galapox, just being able to turn off a charge, that turning point, and fight, huge. Like, that can be absolutely massive. The other option is to change its order. There's loads of utility in this. We don't know what sort of blast weapons this team has right now, but if you have some long range blast weapons, let's say you get initiative and there's a guy in a central clump of people, and you just go, right, my first activation is this guy is going to turn over here and flip you to engage, and they go, sweet, I'm now going to activate that guy and run him away to cover, and you go, Vox Scream, 1 CP, no you're not, and now here's the big bomb. They might not have a big bomb, but you know what I mean? Like, that could be a really cool sequence of events to get a nice little play out going forwards. And finally, perform a free dash action with it. Specify the location for your opponent to move it to. That's an interesting thing. So basically, don't touch your opponent's models with your greasy Dorito fingers. But yeah, so okay, that's great. Yeah, so the reason, and we saw this actually in the battle report, he dashed the model out of cover onto an objective that had been marked with a Terrachem, and then suddenly, boom, here's a bunch of mortal wounds, and now you're exposed in the open for me to be able to shoot you. Again, this can be like potentially, I think, really brutal for the way certain people play, because for instance, someone might have done the perfect spacing game, right, where they've done their perfect turning point 1, they spaced everyone out, they're not within blast range of each other, they're not within torrent range, you can't double charge or whatever, and then suddenly you're just going to go, I'm going to dash this guy next to that other dude, or in the middle of these two, and now suddenly you've set up a double kill potential or whatever. So that could be quite nice. So I quite like that. I like it for both turn 1 application, turn 2 application. All 3 of those are good. I can see this being used a lot, to be honest. The next ability we have is Poison Objective. Select one objective marker this operative controls. It doesn't have a Terrachem token. It gains one of your Terrachem tokens, and the first time an enemy operative without a Terrachem token, says Terrachem token a lot in this, moves within 2 inches of that objective marker, it suffers D3 more wounds and gains a Terrachem token until the end of the battle. The fact that you get to do this as many times as you want is pretty cool. So it doesn't say that you can only do this once. So I'm assuming you can just go around and poison objectives to your heart's content. So this is quite useful for elite teams if you find yourself on, say, like capture, and you have wasted APL on turning point 1, right? So you can just suddenly move up and go, I'm actually just going to not waste my APL. I'm going to move dash and poison this objective, and then it's giving you a little bit of extra durability on your objective, and it gives immediate D3 mortal wounds. And then also in the ready operative step of each initiative phase, any operatives with a Terrachem token suffer D3 mortal wounds, roll separately for each. So effectively, if someone touches an objective, they're going to take 2d3 mortal wounds, potentially more. So there's a good chance that actually you're going to mess again with breakpoints, which is where this could be quite impactful. So, let's say it's a commando and you roll hot, you could be making someone into one-hit range, particularly now with the nerf to just a scratch. That's a really strong ability. Okay, let's look at some of the other stuff they got here. So they got Flayed Skin. While this operative is visible to and within 3 inches of an enemy operative, your opponent cannot reroll attack or defense dice for that enemy operative. Whoa. 2 EP. This is good. This is really good. So I'm going to explain why I think this is really good. So there's 2 benefits to this. So in melee, your opponent not being able to reroll their attack dice is a huge difference between effective trading and not. And like a lot of teams their reliability can be focused on their rerolls. So let's say you look at Chaos Cult with their access to Relentless and Ceaseless, just removing that from those models whenever they fight you is going to be disgusting. Additionally, in ITD, your indirect weapons are all 3 inches, so that's going to be a factor for them as well. That's really nice, and I think that in general is a really strong ability. The fact it also affects defense dice is pretty tasty as well, because so if you just roll well and your opponent just fluffs, you can get quite a few like nasty kills that people probably aren't expecting. So just in general, messing with rerolls, very, very strong. Kazakin won't care, but some teams will. And particularly the fact that you can mess around with the defense dice as well is a great ability. So Intercession's going to sort of hate this sort of thing, because a lot of their shooting is based around rerolls, and you can just say basically 2 EP, you're not getting them within 3 inches, come closer. Note, by the way, that if I'm more than 6 inches away, I'm probably obscured, so you have to get in that niche little sweet spot range where you're definitely within charge range, and I'm going to have fun when you get there. There's another bit in this like equipment thing that I just want to touch on really quickly. It says, not available for an operative equipped with a Grizzly Trophy. Grizzly Trophy and the Legionary abilities is -1 attack within 3 inches. I think that means that they're going to have that as well. I assume it's going to be the same as Legionary, which is, by the way, one of the best defensive buffs that I think Legionary have, outside of the 5-up Feel No Pain for the Anointed. But so I'm glad that they didn't stack those together, because no rerolls and -1 attack would be absolutely brutal. And I just had a thought then about commandos with choppers going down to 2 attacks against Grizzly Trophy dude, which is hilarious. But just something to be aware of, you can't stack those abilities. I'm assuming it's going to be the same. I mean, we have seen different wording on Grizzly Trophies in the past, or similar abilities, so maybe it won't be, but that is a really strong ability. So maybe it's going to be limited to how many of these you can take, but if not, I can see these being taken a lot, because this is if you're a melee team, this is both an offensive and defensive buff. This does both for you. And if you're doing a little bit of shooting, it's still going to help, albeit at closer ranges, so you might be forced to play quite close to your opponent. So let's just have a quick overview of those abilities, and then we'll talk about. Sorry, I've missed one actually. Sorry. The last one is Proclivity for Murder, which is when you incapacitate an operative within its engagement range, you can immediately perform a free charge action or a free dash action, even if it's performed those already. So this is another great ability. So what I like about this ability is uses tactical ploy after a friendly nemesis operative incapacitates an enemy operative within its engagement range. It doesn't say that you have to do it during your turn. So that means that, like, if someone charges you and dies in their own activation, you can now dash somewhere or charge somewhere else with this, which could potentially set up double kills quite nicely. So that's a really strong ability. So in summary then, I think Seek and Destroy at the moment does favour teams that have melee abilities, and this team has a lot of melee abilities. It looks like they also have the ability to flex into shooting if they want to. We've seen missile launchers, heavy bolters, a flamer. I'm assuming that they're probably going to have like a plasma gun and a melter gun, similar to the other Legionary set. If they do, then this team's going to have like a really good toolkit to be able to do damage. Question is, like, is it sufficient to sort of deny the big elite hunters out there in the world? I think you'll see things like flayed skin used a lot to try and force people to not have rerolls, or at least make it a little bit more swingy. But I haven't seen anything about invulnerable saves. So there is a lot of strong abilities here, and I think they're going to be a very strong team, and I think they have the tools to do well into other elite teams. You know, by delaying their activations, by controlling your activations with the Vox Scream, denying that sort of initiative play that I think teams like Kazakin like to do. So, they might be able to run a melter gun up at the end of the turning point, but at least they're not getting relentless. And by the way, you're going to delay them if they win initiative and make sure you kill that guy going forwards. Potentially as well, they could be taking mortal wounds if you're on an objective. So they then don't want to stand on the objective, otherwise they're taking damage. There's some nice bits within this. So I think this is going to be a strong team. So from what we've seen so far, and I'll refresh this when we see the full rules, and maybe I'm completely corrected. But this is looking like a strong team to me. I'm seeing a lot of good abilities that is going to make them, I think, pretty good when it comes to fighting and killing people and scoring secondaries and controlling the pace of the game. So a great set of abilities right there. If that's excited you, and you are looking to buy Kill Team Nightmare, by the way, if you do so with one of the affiliate links that are in the description below, you'll get a discount if you go through one of the major retailers. Most of them offer discounts in the discounts below, and they'll do a little bit of a kickback to us as well and support the channel. So it's really no effort on you, but you can just go ahead and just follow that link, buy a purchase on Saturday, and away we go, and everyone wins, except from the Emperor. But yeah, okay, so let's talk about Mandrakes. So, first ability, Within Shadow. An operative is within shadow if any of the following is true. It's within 1 inch of a heavy part of a terrain feature and that part is not lower than it, i.e. you're within 1 inch of heavy terrain, fine. Any part of its base is underneath a vantage point, sounds easy. It is within 1 inch of a shadow portal token, which is an ability that we've seen earlier on in the shadow passage thing. Alright. Interesting. This on itself doesn't seem too bad, right? I mean, it's like, sure, whatever, like you're within shadows, faction ability. It seems very easy to trigger. Everyone knows most of my terrain has heavy in the midboard. The heavy is usually near to objectives. Sounds like you're going to be able to achieve that. Octarius has lots of areas that are beneath vantage points that's within heavy. Sounds nice and easy to me. I can't see you you're rarely not going to be within shadow is I guess my point. So read most of your abilities that you want to have as saying you're going to be within shadow. Now there might be a way that you as the opponent can play around this where you can try and like hold back, but most of the objectives are probably going to be within shadow. So just something to be aware of. Alright, so let's read the Umbral Entities rule. Each Mandrake operative has a 5+ invulnerable save. If it's within shadow, see left, it has a 4+ invulnerable save instead. Alright, so this looks like you're going to have a 10-body team, 8 wounds apiece, and they're all going to have 4 invulnerable saves. That's really good. Like, that's a really good ability. I don't really know what to say to that. Like, that's going to weigh differently based on who you're playing against. Some teams just won't care that you have invulnerable saves. Like, they don't have much AP, or they're melee teams, and they don't care at all. Other teams, that's going to like really mess with the way that they want to interact with you. So, and generically a 4+ save is pretty good for a 10-body team. I was expecting these guys to be a bit more fragile than that, but a 4+ invulnerable save is really good. So that's interesting to see as well. Alright, so the next ability we're going to talk about is Soul Strike. Mandrake operatives have ranged weapons with the Soul Strike special rule. Each time a friendly operative makes a shooting attack with such a weapon, in the roll defense dice step of that shooting attack, successful saves are determined differently. Invulnerable saves cannot be used. Well, that's amusing. The team with loads of invulnerable saves don't get them on themselves. Each result that is equal to or less than a target's APL is a successful save and is retained. Okay. And each result that is higher than a target's APL is discarded. Okay. Each retained result of 1 is a critical save. So this is just effectively flipping the saves on its head for a lot of teams, but it's going to weirdly punish teams like Hearthkin Salvagers. So if you are a low APL team but have good saves, think Hyrotech, think Hearthkin, this is going to hurt you significantly more than it would hurt, say, a generic Horde team, because they're saving on 5s anyway. 2 APL, it's just 1s and 2s versus 5s and 6s. But if you have like a 3+ save normally, this is a massive massive damage increase for the Mandrake player, and basically just cutting through your armor saves. So that's really good. I'm going to be interested to see how potent this team's shooting is before I can make a decision on how impactful that's going to be. But generically, just reducing every opponent's armor save that you fight to at best a 4-up equivalence is really good, right? So like you're shooting, let's say Custodes. Well, yeah, you got 2+ save. Sure thing, bro. No, you don't. You now have a 4-up save or 3-. And then for the guys like the big shield dudes that you have in, say, like RBTs or the Endurant and that sort of stuff, this is gonna like disproportionately hurt them a lot more than it does, as I said, the squishy horde models. So teams like Pathfinders, they are expecting not to make saves, right? Like whenever you make a save as a Pathfinder, you go, "Oh my god, I actually made a save. That's really cool." But this is going to hurt those teams, as I said, that are expecting to make saves. So this is going to be a weird one to balance and see how it impacts people, because it's going to be like affecting some people way more than it does others. But it's a strong ability, straight up strong ability. All right, next ability we're going to look at is Haunting Focus, which is a ability tied to an operative on their data card. So once in each strategy phase, when it's your turn to use Strategic Deploy Class, you can use this ability instead. If you do so, select one enemy operative for this operative to focus on until the end of the turning point. When your opponent will activate that enemy operative, if this operative is ready, you can activate this operative first. If you do so during that activation, you cannot select any other enemy operatives as targets for combat or shooting attacks made by this operative while the enemy operative is in the kill zone. Alright, that is a really strong ability. I like the mechanic because it's like a weird pairing mechanic where you have to really think about it beforehand, and you're very much telegraphing who you want it to be. But that being said, there's many times where this is going to be like obvious, right? So let's say you're in Into the Dark and you have a guy on an objective and you have this guy looking to kill the guy on that objective. Well, you just go, all right, well, I'm just going to choose that guy, and whenever you choose to do whatever you want to do with them, I'm going to kill them before you get a chance. That is really strong. I think for teams like Breachers, they're going to absolutely hate this. Like, any ability to basically say, oh, right, well, I can see that you've set up a perfect GA2 here, and you want to try and move out and do your thing and kill me. Well, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sit and Haunting Focus you, and then I know that the second you go and try and do your thing, I'm just going to kill you straight away. That's a really interesting ability. I think that could, like it's like a weird GA2. Is that going to be broken? I think it's going to be like really strong. I can see that being really, really strong and really frustrating to play against. And again, this is kind of playing around with that initiative and turning point 2, because you're going to be able to effectively, by doing this, deny your opponent activating an operative. So in the mirror match of sort of like 10 model teams that are quite fragile, like the Vishits, that sort of thing, this could be really strong where you just go, yeah, you know what, like I'm gonna control the pace of this game. I'm gonna select this guy, and that's one of your threats that you set up, and I know that I'm gonna go before it. So it's gonna force your opponent to set up like multiple threats against either this model or multiple threats across the battlefield, and accept that this guy is just gonna kill that guy. I guess the difficulty is that you just wait as a Jakari player, right? Like, you never have to activate this model until they get their person going, and then you just go, yep, sweet, that's the one. So that's really strong. I think that's going to be a little bit broken potentially. That sounds crazy strong. Alrighty. Those are the ones that I had written down. Oh no, sorry, I didn't. I lied. We have the Shadow Passage as well. Okay, Shadow Passage. If this operative is within Shadow, perform a free, normal move action with it, but instead of moving it, remove it from the kill zone and set it back up again within Shadow, but not within engagement range, nor line of sight of any operatives. It cannot make shooting attacks until the next turning point. Alrighty. I think this could potentially be absolutely crazy. So there's a few ways that I see this being used. One is, I think you can loot stuff like with the grot. Like, so commanders used to have the grot set up on Turning Point 1 in such a way that it could either steal an objective from you with capture at the end of a turning point, or it could jump across and secure something. You have to commit way more resources, or it can loot something turn 1. I think this is going to give you the same ability. So you could potentially set this up so that you can move across the board really uninterrupted. And note as well that because of the way this is worded, like, you could be threatening potentially 4 objectives. Like, well, you could be threatening all of the objectives really, without ever really worrying about it. And whatever objective your opponent doesn't go to, you can move there and steal straight away. So turn 1 against Mandrakes is going to be very hard to predict and solve, because you're going to have to try and defend against them stealing your home objectives, them stealing all the far-reaching middle objectives, or potentially just delaying this until the end of a turning point and shooting through and scoring free tack ops such as surge forwards, or recover item. I guess you can screen this out because you can block it with the line of sight. So if you position some models in the right way, you should be able to find areas to stop them from being able to get into your back line at least. But I think for elites that's going to be really hard to do. Maybe for your big shooting gunline teams it'll be a bit easier because you have so many models. But that's going to be a really strong ability. I think from my gut's reaction to that, I think that's going to be slightly too strong. But maybe that's just me. But it's looking really strong. There is some other abilities that this team have as well. So paradolic projection. So this is an ability to effectively treat or make an enemy operative count as being injured, and also mean that its APL cannot be positively modified. Remove any positive APL modifiers it has. That's 1 AP, and you select one enemy operative within shadow or in this operative's line of sight. So usually, if you're going to be hiding, you're going to be in heavy terrain or heavy cover, which means you're in shadow, which means you're then able to have this sort of ability stacked against you. And if you're not in shadow, then you're probably going to be in their line of sight because they can get an advantage. So this is this is a really strong ability, right? So let's say that you've seen them preemptively move a grenadier into place, they've con-buffed them, and they're setting up a big turn 2 threat. Well, you can now just say, well, you're no longer con-buff, so you can't move, dash and throw, so you can only move and throw. Oh, and now you're injured, so you can only be moving 4 inches. And suddenly, they've gone from a 9-inch sort of like move and dash to a 4-inch threat range. So that is crazy strong when you think about how it can be stacked against the right target to be able to just, at the right time, nerf someone and just remove their abilities. So yeah, that's a really nice, strong defensive ability that lets you control the pace of the battle. Okay, so let's just summarise what we've seen and I guess just talk through my predictions on these teams. From what it looks like, with the movement shenanigans that Mandrakes have, the fact they have a team-wide 4-up invulnerable save, and that their main abilities seem quite easy to trigger, I'm going to say I think they're going to be very strong, and I think Night Lords are going to be very strong as well. So I think you'll be able to play the mission really well as Mandrakes, and I think that the Night Lords have some amazing abilities to be able to just control the pace of the game, and that cannot be understated for competitive play. Like the more I play Kill Team, the more I realise that a lot of the game is about setting up for Turning Point 2 and controlling that initiative and how the game flows at Turning Point 2 in those first couple of activations, and it can often be sort of won or lost there. There's some teams that do break that mold, but for a lot of teams that's usually where it seems to be made, and these teams can play directly into that. So if you're an aggressive player, I think these teams are going to be great for you, and if you're playing locally against a lot of aggressive players, I think as well these teams can be great for you, because you're able to just go, all right, I see that you've sent a very targeted aggressive model forwards and you want to try and do something with that, and I have an answer, and it looks like this, and you can suddenly move that answer to the right place, and go from there. So without seeing everything, it's hard to say if they're going to be broken or not, but I think these are going to be two strong teams, and I think they're going to be very impactful when they join the meta. And it's interesting to see what teams are currently at the top of the meta now. So I think what we're looking at, and this is a bit of a spoilers for the tier list, but I think we're going to see teams like Felgor, teams like Galapox, teams like Pathfinders at the sort of the top of the meta for the immediate future, and I think these teams can play well in amongst that. Now, Pathfinders probably isn't a good matchup for the Mandrakes, but I think they'll have a good time into the rest of the field. But note that they do still have some of the abilities that you want to be able to defend yourself against those guys. And both of these teams want to hide in heavy cover, which Pathfinders don't enjoy. So long as you're doing that, then this is good for you. So yeah, I think there's going to be two really strong and impactful teams, and I'm very interested to see how they play into the meta. If you are looking to pick them up, as I said, I remind you again about the affiliate links we have down in the description. Just to buy them through there, and it gives us support, and you help passively support the channel going forwards. All right. But now into the main bit that I want to talk about, which is the Patreon priority questions. So this is my way of really paying back the thanks to the Patreons for all the support they give me by answering questions that they have sent in. And I now give time and sort of give my thoughts on the various topics of conversation they have asked. And so without further ado, I'm going to get straight into the first question, which is how best to defend against alpha strikes. Okay, so let's sort of caveat this with a few different things. One is we have to figure out what kind of alpha strike we're talking about, and the other is acknowledging that there are some things that you probably can't defend against entirely. Right, so a lot of alpha strikes are terrain and map dependent. Right, so the first thing that I think you need to do when you're looking at how to defend against an alpha strike is is there a certain side of the map that I need to take that's going to give me sufficient terrain or a route or deny a route that means that I can actually deploy the number of models that I have safely? And this can be quite important because I generically, when I design my maps, I like to try and make it so that most teams can deploy safely without risk of a long-range alpha strike turning point 1. But it is still not necessarily impossible. Some teams just have too much movement potential when it comes to these sorts of things. So, perfect example is, let's say, Pathfinders. They can do a weird sort of turn 1 recon dash into a recon sweep dash. That's 6 inches. Then they can Monka move dash for a further 9 inches and throw a 6-inch indirect grenade. And that's just way too much movement potential, really, to deal with. On turning point 1 for any map design to solve per se, and you therefore might have to try and do some other things to solve it yourself. So, but the first thing generically is look at the board state, look at the terrain, and make sure you're choosing a side that has sufficient room for your models to be able to deploy without being hit from a long range strike. And really ask your opponent some good questions at the start to sort of quantify that and qualify that. So, do they have the ability to ignore obscurity? Do they have any long-range blast? Can they get you out of light cover? Can they get you out of heavy cover? What are the range of those abilities? These are sort of questions that you need to be asking yourself, right? So, or asking them. And your opponent should be honest about that, right? We shouldn't be playing a game of gotchas, right? And if you're winning all your games because your opponent just doesn't know what they're doing, that's not a fun interactive game. Educate your opponent, warn them, tell them, just so you're aware, I do have the ability to ignore obscurity, just so you're aware, I do have a long-range blast weapon. And let them try and figure out how they're then going to solve it. So give them the information and then let them make decisions. We want to play against people's decisions, not against them just being caught out. This is my opinion. All right, so ask the right questions to give yourself the right information to make the right decisions. All right, so the classic ones that I've seen that will catch people out are the Wormblade forward deploys. So they can come out of hiding and they can be a certain range up the board, so within 6 inches of their drop zone, but that's within, so actually the width of the base makes it 7, and they can shoot from there. So does that put them on advantage? Does that give them a certain angle, etc., etc.? And then figure out what it is, and then space out as you need to accordingly. All right, so first thing is always terrain. Figure that out. Ask good questions about what opponents' abilities have, and then figure out where you can and can't deploy based on the terrain that you have. And during your deployment, ask your opponent questions. Ask them to put up proxy models if they have one, all right? So say, I'm just going to put my model down here. Can you place a proxy model here? Would you have visibility? Would you have a line of sight? Ask these questions, and it becomes a lot easier if they don't have the ability to ignore obscurity, right? Because you can say, I'm going to put a model here. Is it obscured? Yes, no. And you can figure it out from there. But the laser pointer is your best friend here. So you should be able to find that on most of my maps, the deployment zones have safe areas with obscurity. You just have to find them, and you can ask that question. And if you know that your opponent can ignore it, then see where you can find visibility blocking, or just stick to the heavy terrain, right? So it's unusual for teams to be able to turn off all of those things concurrently at once and really catch you out with multiple of those things. Okay. The next thing on that. So we're talking about threat ranges. Okay, so the next thing you might be fighting against is a sort of melee ability, right? So you're worried about goats maybe doing like a double dash forwards and then charging you turn 1 or something like that with a +1 inch movement. You could look at where you place your barricades, all right? So again, seeing where people or where the routes are and trying to add in barricades in the right places to deny movement. So maybe the Pathfinders only have one route down the side of the board to be able to get to you. You go, okay, well, I know you're going to try and go down either left or right-hand side of me, so I'm going to place a barricade that's going to then force you to pay a traverse cost. That traversal cost is then going to mean that you're not going to be able to get across to me. I think that would be a great way of helping you do it. The next thing that I sort of talk about, and I talked about this in the past, but I think it's really important to have valid threats to mean that your opponent pays for any alpha strike that they have. Okay, so by that I mean, and this does change subtly on different terrain and maps. You want to have models on engage, right? So that if your opponent does charge straight through and try and do some damage to you, you at least force them to trade, right? So it will help keep your opponent honest, because there's always a risk in all these things, right? So they throw a grenadier out and there's a chance that grenadier does nothing, it whiffs, all right? And if it's only because you've spaced correctly and used terrain correctly, able to hit one model or two models, well, there's a chance they don't kill anything. And now what you've done is expose a model, one of your strong models, granted it's usually quite strong, and if you have a model on engage or silent weapons or whatever it is, you can then go, well, by pushing out that far, I'm going to be able to punish you and hit you back, right? This obviously comes with a caveat. If you have models on engage, you have to protect them with either, well, optimally, visibility blocking. You want them to just not be visible. That's the best way to do it. So behind an Octarius door, just underneath a vantage point, wherever you want to be, where you cannot be seen at all, that's your best optimal protection. Or use the ability of obscurity against teams that don't have means to turn it off. All right, so don't sit there, trying to use obscurity against a team like Pathfinders and then be surprised while your guys on engage are dead. Like, don't do that. But just be aware that you probably want to use visibility blocking in that instance and go forth, right? So visibility blocking if you can, then obscurity blocking if you can't. And then having those threats just means that if someone runs out in front of you and gives you that easy shot, you're going to be able to take it. What it also means is, if they lose the scouting step, they can't just throw a model directly into the open, all right? So they will have that awareness, but remember, scouting steps are resolved first, then initiative is determined. So if you win that scouting option, and then they've said they've got their free dash, but you went with infiltrate, and they go, oh, right, I'm going to do my free dash, and you go, yeah, where do you want to go? And then they go, I'm going to go here. Right, who's going first? Right? So if they're setting up this perfect, I'm going to yeet my model down the board, and I'm going to go in a straight line and beeline it to you, then they have to be aware of the fact that you might have initiative with infiltrate, and you're going to match their grenadier with a grenadier, say. And now the big investment they've made into this grenadier is suddenly pointless, or whatever we want it to be. So, right, so have some valid threats, use the scouting step to your advantage. If you see them setting up an alpha strike, really think about what you're choosing in your scouting step to be able to either deny them that move completely, or to be able to match it and maybe present your own counter threat, right, which is of a higher priority for them. And the other point on that scouting step is you get creative with it. Like you can potentially just shoot the guy. You can potentially use a scouting option to dash the only person they can see to safety, or you can use the extended range of the barricade to place a sequence of barricades. That means that now they have to pay 4 inches of movement to be able to get across it, and suddenly now they can't reach you. Right, so it's another way of thinking about it. Right, there's a bunch of tools there that you can be used. Another option is zoning. So, like, if you have forward deploy of your own or screening of your own, and you know that the way that your opponent is trying to get to you is through a forward deploy, and a perfect example of this is the commandos forward deploy sneaky get. It can't be within 6 inches of enemy operatives, and it has to be within range of heavy cover, right? So in this instance, let's say you're in a commando mirror match, well, actually deploying your guy first can be really important, because you can then place it in the only valid area of terrain that's going to be able to let them charge you turning point 1, and then you go, you know what, I'm going to place this guy here and I'm going to zone you out, all right? And now I know that you're not going to be able to actually get to me or get to the terrain piece that you want to get to, because I've placed someone there first. And there's a bunch of teams that can do this. Hunter Clay can do this. Pathfinders can do this with a drone, and it just lets you effectively, boom, I'm going to place this person over here, and I'm not going to let you do what you want to do. But there's also ways that you can do this during the turning point. So if you're playing against like High-Tech Circle, they have the ability to drop their death mark in, but again, it can't be within 6 inches of any operatives. So if you know that they're trying to achieve I'm going to drop my death mark onto a vantage point and shoot you on turning point 1 as my first activation, all right, sweet, that's really cool. My solution to this is quite simple. I'm going to place a guy, turning point 1, I'm going to run him forwards, I'm going to sit him underneath the vantage point that I think you're going to go for, and now I've denied that threat because you can't place up there without being within 6 inches of me, right? So zoning is a way to be able to get around it. And solve those sorts of issues. On ITD, you can use the guard function, I think, quite well. So you can snatch initiative, use guard, and place it in a way that if they try and get through and get the shot off, you at least get to shoot first. You do have to be careful when you're doing this about setting up the sort of like non-reciprocal shots, or forcing it so that they have to take a reciprocal shoot with your guard action. But just something to be aware of. I would always caution that, it depends how good your shooting is and how likely you are to actually kill with your guard action, depending upon if you want to do this or not. But if you, let's say, ignore Overwatch penalties and you have rerolls, then absolutely go for it. But it's something to be aware of. Another option that might be available to you, let's say you're a melee team, is actually setting up a counter charge. So maybe you can move some of your models forwards, pre-activation, whatever, and then have either the ability to order flip or just have them on engage, and know that the model that they're trying to run forwards first, you're just going to charge and pass with, right? So you just move someone in there, a sacrificial body that you don't care about, and you just move them into that model, you sit them in engagement range, and then you know that model now has to spend an entire action killing the model in engagement range. Maybe they can't even do it, but they have to kill that model first before they can do their other thing, and that's wasted a key APL that they probably needed to get the movement to do the thing that they wanted to be able to do. And finally is getting around APL manipulation. So if you have a team that can apply -1 APL, or can reduce positive modifiers to APL, or whatever it's going to be, right, you can just go, all right, in this instance, I've identified your key threat, and I'm going to say, I'm going to use this ability to remove your ability to modify that model's APL. That's really strong, all right? So you can then just go, yep, at this critical time, that model is now no longer +1, and therefore I know that your threat range is significantly less than it was previously. And that can be a good way of getting around it as well. Finally, there is quite a few teams now that have the ability to determine when models can go first. And so, for instance, let's say you're talking about Phobos with its Omni Scrambler. That can be a great way, right? You just go, cool, I can see what you're doing. It's unusual for a team to have multiple Alpha Strikes, particularly now Commanders have been nerfed. So you're probably only going to be able to get one or two. And as Phobos, you can just say, I'm going to deploy a infiltrator invisibility of that model, and I'm going to deny it initially, right? And that's sort of all you need, right? It's just like a not right now, and that gives you enough time to space out, move out, and be able to try and solve the problem of Alpha Strikes. So those are my sort of best tips. Hopefully that's useful. I think if you do all those things, then you're probably, or you're less likely to get hit by an Alpha Strike. There is unfortunately some teams that you just cannot stop the Alpha Strike with. Examples that come to mind is the Hand of the Archon Atomic Grenade and the Felgor Ravager's Tox Bomb. And the main reason for that is because they can be done on conceal, because they can be done from such a long range. A Torment Grenade can forward dash 3 inches, then move dash 9 and throw 6, all on conceal, and it doesn't require visibility. It's very hard to play around that sort of ability, right? So that sort of thing is it's just going to get you. So you have to, in that instance, really look at spacing, trying to use those barricades I talked about, just to try and force it at least so that it doesn't hit the highest density of models that you're looking for. And again, I would say having those threats there so that they get to do it once, but you then punish them towards the end of the turning point because they've taken initiative to be able to do this thing. And now that you know that they're going to you're going to remove that model by the end of the turning point. If you can do that, you can punish them twice. I think that's quite a good option for you. All right. Next question then. So, what is the best faction for progression? And they sort of asked this, and there's 2 questions here, but to play with and to play against. So, generically, I've always said I think the best faction to start the game with is Intercession, right? So, I think Intercession is a very easy, fun team to play, and they teach you the core mechanics of the game without too much distractions in a very, very good way, right? Because they are all about doing the core mechanics of the game. And if you can win within session, I think you've mastered the sort of the fundamental abilities, right? Because I think people generically, in my opinion, get too distracted by all of the individual synergies within a team, and they're trying to figure out how they get their, these various things to work together, and these sort of like cheese combos that they've managed to sort of come up with. And they get really into the weeds of like individual factions, and they haven't learnt the sort of core mechanics, I think, of just moving forward, scoring at the right time, prioritizing the right targets, focusing on reliability, understanding the value of ploys versus CP rerolls, and really focusing on like the win condition of each game. Like where do I get my VP from, rather than how do I try and make this synergy work to maximize my sort of effectiveness in one small area. I think that can be really hard to do, and can be a massive sort of like skill sink when you're learning the game at the beginning, because you're now not thinking about the core mechanics. You're really thinking about how do I min-max my team, and that can be distracting. So I believe that the best faction to begin with is Intercession Squad. I think it is the easiest team, in my opinion, to begin the game with. I would then say that the next team to progress to that is actually probably something like Legionary or Strike Force Justian, and that sounds probably quite weird, right? Because a lot of people probably view Strike Force Justian as like the beginner team, but actually I think they are more complicated to play with, but they also add more a greater variety of abilities. The same though can be said about Legionary, right? I'm not saying there's a right or wrong here, but just generically what I'm talking about is I think playing with those elite teams is going to let you rise much, much quicker and play quicker games as well, which is important when you're starting, but play quick games effectively and learn the core abilities of the game. So I would always say, like, progress to those sorts of now they have more abilities, they have more variety on the data sheets, but ultimately you're still focusing on the core fundamentals of the game, but now you're progressing in the right direction, and you're still able to have fun, play games quickly, and not like worry about trying to do 14 models as your first team. All right, so that's how I personally would say that you want to begin. So start there, progress to start with like sort of in session, progress into your legionary kind of teams, and then I would start looking towards your mid-range team. So I would go really from your 6 body elite into your sort of 10 body with specialists. I think personally Kazakin are a great team for that, because you have specialists, they each have different abilities, you have the ability to shift APL around easily with the comms guy, right? It's not like it's very range restricted and you have to think a lot about the synergies. You can still do things, and the specialists aren't too hard, I guess, to understand what each one does. It's somewhat self-descriptive, right? Like the Plasmion does plasma stuff, the demo guy goes and puts demo mine down, the medic goes and medics people, right? So and they're going to give you the ability, in my opinion, to learn how to play with more bodies and 2 APL, and understand how that changes the game dynamic for you, because it is very, very different when you go from a 3 APL team to a 2 APL team, and initially doing that with 10 bodies I think it is a good change. But there's other teams that do the same thing, right? I'm just saying Kazkin's one example. A slightly more complex version would be like Novitiates, as another good example of what you could do. If you're wanting to go a bit more A level in that, then things like the Hearthkin Salvages are an example of a mid-range, mid-body team that has a lot of abilities that you can use, or Illicidian Starstriders are another good example. So the sequence that I think you should start with is in session into your legionary sort of style. You could argue actually Phobos as well, that's a good progression. Into sort of your Phobos, then into your mid-range team, right? So now you're into your 10 body teams, and then the sort of the next progression from that I think is going into and this is where you want to maybe have like a bit of a divergence. If you think shooting is your thing, you probably want to go into a shooting based like horde team with a lot of synergies. So that could be, let's say, I would sort of describe Wormblade as a shooting team. I know they have some melee models, but Wormblade's a good horde shooter. Vetguard is a good horde shooter. But then getting into those, lots of specialists, lots of models, I think should be the sort of the last team that people go to. And I think if you do it in that way, you'll learn to play quickly because you focus on the core mechanics first, and you've learned each specialist ability as you've gone, and then you get towards that end state. Now, what's different to this, and this is what people are going to talk about, is where melee teams fit into it, right? Because melee teams are, again, very, very different, and they don't necessarily fit into that standard norm of what I've just talked about. So in that instance, I think you'd want to probably start with a team like Felgor, which is a sort of a 10 model melee team, before you go and do something like Galapox or Chaos Cult, because again, with those more fragile teams that are harder to play, you're probably going to find it more difficult if you just jump into them straight away, right? And I think like Chaos Cult's a perfect example of a team that, in my mind, is it has a like really high skill floor and a really high skill ceiling, right? And we saw that at the World Championships. Like, they can be played extremely well if you know all of the synergies and are really good with your positioning and know exactly when to mutate people, and you focus on min-maxing all of this stuff in your team. They can be played really, really well. Equally, like, if you're not that experienced with a team, like, you're a bunch of 7 wound dudes that are just going to get shot off a table immediately because you're not mutating in the right order. You're never going to get a torment because you're going to get prioritized effectively, and suddenly you never got to your sort of like good state at the end of the game because you just got picked apart. So with melee teams, again, I would say start with fewer models, learn the core rules before you then progress and do the sort of the larger horde-based teams. When it comes to Eldar, I think they are again a difficult team to place where you should or shouldn't start with them. So I think personally, if I was to design something, and there is a bit of personal bias in this because of the teams that I think are good and bad and the way that I perceive the strength of teams in my mind, but if I was to advise a player to have the perfect pick, I would go do Intercession, then do Kazakin, and then do either a melee team, a shooty team, or a like elven team. And I'd probably suggest to them to go. I'm torn between Corsairs or Void Dancers. Part of me wants to say Corsairs because they're more like they're more of a standard sort of team, but also I know Void Dancers have very like easy data sheets, whereas Corsairs have more of a mental load. But that's where I'd sort of say like then start stretching out and doing those other things, right? So this, by the way, is purely from a how do you like educate yourself point of view, but not what I think might be one of the most important parts of it, which is choosing a team that you're actually going to enjoy playing. So all of these things, by the way, like choosing a team like Kazakin. If you hate Kazakin, you hate the look of them, you don't think they're interesting to play, you don't like the models, you don't like the lore, like, do not go and buy Kazakin, right? Like, you're just going to hate it, and you're not going to have fun doing it, right? So, whatever you do, don't pick a team that you're not going to enjoy just to try and get better at the game with that specific team. Try and pick something that you are interested in doing or interested in playing with. You like the models, you like the lore, or whatever. Like it engages on you in some level, which means that you want to pick it up and play with it. Otherwise, it will just sit there and never be used. And so that's personally my advice: is start small, then go to big. Is on model count is probably the best way of dealing with it, and then within that, choose teams that match both what you enjoy on a personal level and what works for you on a play style level. And I don't think it's bad to actually then, add a little bit of variety as you go on. Like once you've started mastering teams, then feel free to mess around, and it probably is worth playing a little bit of each team, playing a horde shooty team and then a melee team and then an elite team, and like give yourself a bit of rounding so you can actually see what you play best with. But generically, when you're first getting out and starting, I think if you focus on the core mechanics of the game rather than the abilities on your data sheet, you're probably going to be on for a winner. Because if you want to really get good at Kill Team, you have to focus on how you score VP. And that is above everything else the win condition on the game, right? So it is not about how quickly you can kill models. It is not about sort of like where you get shots and stuff. It's about how you score VP. It's about how you choose your attack ops, and it's about reliably getting those points. And if you're not doing that, then the rest of it's kind of pointless. You'll have great fun potentially killing loads of people, but if you're not scoring VP, then you're not going to be winning. So yeah, that's I guess my way to answer that. The next point is what's good to learn if you're playing against it. So this is where I think it's useful again to have a variety of players in your play group. We're really blessed. So at Sanctuary we have a play group of it's probably 60 players now or something crazy like that. And usually there's about 20 on a Thursday, Friday, right? So there is a lot of players that turn up, and they have a huge variety of teams, and therefore you have the ability to just play into a variety of teams. And you should, in my opinion, look to mix up your play partner regularly, right? Like go to a club, speak to someone new, and rather than just play with the same person that you play against every week, be like, hey, let's mix it up, let's play something else. And what teams have you got? What teams have I got? And try and find yourself a variety of experiences, because if you just stick to playing the same thing, then you'll learn You will learn how in your local meta to beat that player with that team. You will not learn like how other teams work, what other abilities they have, and best prepare yourself for a tournament, which is what I think is really important, right? So you want to make sure that you understand how other people play, see different ways of doing it, and experience different teams. And if you do have a player in your local group who is a particularly good player, I would say don't be afraid to play them, right? Get reps in and ask them loads of questions during the game and ask them loads of questions after the game, right? If they're a good player, then they should be more than happy to talk to you about what's going on the board, what they're thinking about, and why they're making the decisions they're making. Because it's a casual game, right? Like they're probably not going to tell you everything at a tournament, particularly during a game, because they don't want to give you the win by just like telling you how to beat them. But pre-tournament, in a casual, like they're going to talk it through. So when it comes to choosing opponents to play against or what teams to play against, I'd say mix it up. Try and play as many different people as possible. If you're, in a or if you're not yet in a club environment, you just play at home. I would say definitely try and get to a club. Like that's going to massively help you in the way you connect, you socialise. You find more, like new opponents and new ways of playing it, and better understand other teams. Mix up the teams you play with and the teams you play against, and then don't be afraid to go take on your local competitive guys, and see how you do. You'll probably be surprised at how close it can be, even though you in your mind you might build it up to be far worse than that. So those are my suggestions and opinions on how best or the best faction and who to play with and who to play against. So hopefully that helps. All right, the next question I've got is how to best track CP, VP, and ploys, etc. And is it worth it? So the example here is a lot of people have a notepad and they will write down what they spend their person or their CP on, what your opponent spends their CP on, and track that during the course of the game, as well as the VP and all that sort of stuff. This could this entirely, I guess the answer to this is how does your brain work, right? So for some people, this is a really good way of allowing them to remember that they've played a ploy and therefore get a certain buff or ability during the course of a turning point. And it might help remove sort of the risk of tournament fatigue. So let's say you're in game 4 and you're like, oh, did I do that ability this turn? I can't remember. And this could be a tool to help you. I would also caution that it could just be adding to your tournament fatigue. So maybe do a tournament with it and a tournament without it, and then see which you made more or less mistakes on, and see which you felt better or worse at the end of the day. Because I personally think that like adding this extra thing for you to do throughout the course of a tournament is probably adding like a bit more into your workload. That's maybe taking up capacity and thinking time. That means that you're not necessarily able to focus on board state and other things potentially. And I honestly, this is so like individual driven. It's very, very hard to answer because it is down to you. This could be a massive capacity bonus for you, whereby just writing it down, suddenly your league's ahead and it's put that constant reminder in your mind. Or, as I said, it could be a massive drain. So mess around with it, is probably a good way of describing it. Some people quite like the reference cards. So, there's various... well, clearly you got the official GW ones now that they have with the new Salvation teams, but also there's the cards that like Phil team makes, where it will have the ploy written on it, and then you just put that card in front of you when you play it, and you then know right that you've done that ploy for the turning point, whatever it's going to be, right? So find whatever way works. It could be writing it down, it could be that sort of stuff. Generically, I would probably say, unless you know your opponent's team really well, writing down your opponent's ploys is probably a capacity drain. So unless you think that your opponent is likely to forget what ploys they have or haven't spent this turn, which I don't really ever think I've had an issue with, and sure, it might have happened, but normally I just sort of take their word for it that they spent the CP on the thing that they said they did. I don't think most people are cheating, so if they do, it's very rare. So I almost feel like it's like it's going to protect you from that, but unlikely to really help you. I guess unless it's a ploy that directly affects your models in some way, which then you could maybe factor into it. So yeah, I don't know. I think generically, it might just cost you more capacity than it gains you. Is my risk. But the only way to really know that is, I think, to do some games with it, some games without it, and then see how you feel afterwards. So do you feel better or worse? Did you remember less or more? How do you feel at the end of a tournament day? Because I know, for instance, I don't write stuff down as is, and like at the end of the tournament that I played the other day, I was really tired. Like I had 4 like mind-boggling games on stream, and I was constantly trying to make sure I didn't get any rules wrong, because you're on stream and you really don't want to mess up. And so I was there going, I am just absolutely knackered. I spent the entire time standing, and I was playing some incredibly good players. And so every move counts. And that's the thing. Like, when you're in those matches where it comes down to a VP or whatever, or in the last match I got absolutely smashed, but that like any small mistake is going to be really, really impactful. This to me feels like it's something else that I'd be adding onto that list of things that I'm thinking about when I probably don't need it. And therefore, I think personally it would detract. For CP, I think you just need a big dice, and you just stick it in the middle, and you put it next to your opponent's dice, and you just make sure you both track as you go forward. So big dice for CP is always good, I think. In my opinion, it makes it really easy to track who's got what. And if you both use the same mechanic of scoring that, then that works as well. So personally, what I have is just a little tray that has an area for CP, an area for my VP, and I just put dice in as I go, and I do that at the end of a turning point, right? So I will count my CP down during the turning point and then add VP at the end of a turning point, and it's usually not too bad. But for ploys, I'd probably say a notepad as you go seems like it could be excessive, but maybe I just need to try it more. Like maybe I'll be a convert. I'll go to a tournament and give it a go. But my gut feel is it will be like chess clocks for a lot of players, where the first few times you do it, it's going to add something that you have to remember, and therefore take capacity away. So maybe you just have to learn to get with it, and the benefit as a result will be better. But initially, maybe it's not too useful, is my gut reaction anyway. Hopefully that was helpful. Alrighty, so the next question is talking about the fact that the jump tests are gone, and really, is this a good or a bad change? And then looking back on my previous maps that I've created, what do I think about the fact there's now no jump tests? And does that require sort of a redesign of the maps? So firstly, looking at the change from a competitive point of view, I think the removal of jump tests is good from a competitive point of view. Now, I know I've heard what people said online. They go, for narrative games, I want to keep it. For casual games, I want to keep it. And what I say is, like, in that instance, just talk to your opponent, and I'm sure they're going to be more than happy to keep it in there, right? Like, if you're genuinely playing narrative and your opponent says, "Oh no, that's a bit too spicy fun for me," like, then that sounds odd. Like, you're probably not playing narrative, right? So, but if you're playing competitive, I think it's a good change, and there is a few reasons for this. I think movement is one of the key fundamentals of the game that wasn't random. And an example of where I think this edition has been better from previous editions was the charge rolls in previous edition was random, and that was removed from the game because it didn't feel good and it didn't add value when a key charge roll failed, and the impact could be really, really significant for it. And I think that's the same with the jump test, right? So I think the fact that jump tests could potentially not just deny you a VP, but leave you exposed, was really impactful. So the The bit that I think was difficult on that particular terrain as well was, for some teams, you had to invest a lot to get to the point where you were even making the jump test, right? So I talked to Phil from Tabletop Impulse about this, and he sort of said, like, it would be cool if there were sort of 2 routes to every objective. There was one that was a shorter route where you had a jump test involved, and therefore it was a bit of a risk, and you rolled a dice and maybe you passed it, maybe you didn't. And then there was another one where if you actually got to, or you could take a longer route to the objective, but you could still get to it, and away you go. And I think that philosophy is fantastic, and I completely agree with it. However, the maps as they were, they didn't facilitate that. There was only one route really to the objectives, and that was via a jump test. So to score primary, to participate in the main game, you had to roll for these tests. And the next part upon that was, to get to the point where you're taking the jump test, you had to climb 4 inches up, move across, and pay a movement penalty for this. So you are now potentially using a scouting phase dash to be able to go 3-3 on primary turning point 1, and what stops you from potentially losing the game is a single roll on a dice, where not just now have you wasted a scouting step, but you've wasted a VP, you've lost the VP, and you've now got a model exposed in the open that's going to die. So you've you have, through one dice roll, had this massive effect on your team. And weirdly, it scales in its impact based on the team you're playing, right? So let's say you're playing an elite team, and now you have an intercessor that's just stood in the open. Well, that is going to potentially hurt you significantly more when that model is then killed than, say, you're playing Vet Guard and it was one model out of 14, right? So this is my point with it, is like it didn't scale well between the various options of team size, and the potential impact of failing it. I believe, in a competitive sense, was too harsh. So I think jump tests being removed was a good thing. The next question was, well, instead of removing them, what if you failed it, you lost 2 inches of movement instead, right? And again, I like the idea of that. I think it's a good idea, but now that's changing the core rules again in a different way. So, like, what makes what is the easiest way of solving this problem? It has to be a question to be answered, right? Because if you add another rule in, then like it's something else to be forgotten. So a great one that I've heard is, if you only do jump tests if you're injured, or if you're injured, then if you fail it, you fall off, whatever. Again, I think it's a cool idea, but like, if we add in another rule that people, so you're in the balanced data slate, changing that rule to make it in something completely different is kind of like a core rules change, which feels like it's to be in like a season change rather than in a balanced data slate per se. So I believe, from a purely competitive point of view, just saying easiest change you can do is just don't roll for it anymore. It's automatically passed. I think is a good change. If you're playing narratively, or you're playing a casual game and you want to have that thrill and excitement in the game, just ask your opponent and just say, hey, can we play a jump test in this game? I'm sure that they're going to say yes. Or if they're a die-hard sweat and they don't want to play with it, but you do, just say, well, I'm playing with jump tests, you don't have to. And just roll your dice anyway, right? And if you don't pass it, then just sit in the open and die. Like, that's totally cool. And if that's the way you want to play your game, there is no one out there that should be telling you otherwise. Remember, the balanced data slate is focused on competitive changes. It is focused on sort of giving tournaments and sort of like the competitive game, match play game, the tweaks it needs to remain balanced. It's not there to try and direct how narrative games should be played, right? So it's a different focus, in my opinion. It's a different focus on the two things, and I think where the balanced data slate is trying to change the game, I think that change is good. The next question is, obviously, if you look at version 2 of my map pack, there is loads of jump spots that exist between the Octarius walls and whatever, which has never really been used because no one ever really thought to use it, nor needed to use it. But now, obviously, there is people are talking about jump tests more, and away they go. Will it need redesign? You know what, it probably does. Like, there's probably some ways to exploit this that I haven't figured out yet, because if I'm totally honest, when I was building the version 2 maps, I was not considering jump tests as a regular thing for competitive play, and therefore what it could open to you, I don't really know the full impact. So it is something that I will try and consider in my version 3 maps, so hopefully we'll see less of an impact there, but it's just something to be aware of. The version 2, I didn't consider it, and I don't think, when I look at the maps, I don't think it breaks anything. I think there's some interesting things you can do by moving around, but I don't think it's going to cause into a really bad situation per se, but maybe there is. So have a look at the maps, maybe try and see if you can do some jump tests and see where you get to in the game, and let me know how it goes. All right, so I'm on to the final patron priority question for this week, which is epic. So I'm maybe catching up. I am on an hour and 20, so maybe not. But anyway, how to improve movement and positioning, which is for TP1 and TP2. And really, I sort of the way that this question was worded, it was focused on looking at how competitive players usually seem to be better with their movement, and it's all about where they place models in turning point 1 without overcommitting, or during turning point 2 not getting bad trades and that sort of stuff. And so I'm going to just chat now a little bit about movement and positioning. So there's a few key rules that I just want to like throw out there that people can just have in their background, to have in your toolbox. The first thing is, and I think this is like one of the hardest lessons that I try to teach people, and it's going to sound like it's not hard, but I promise you it genuinely is, right? Is that passing with a model without moving is okay, right? Like, it is okay to just on turning point 1 just pass and do nothing, right? Like, you don't always have to do something with a model, and I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. So the most common mistake I see is people have their, say, like 14 model vet guard team, and they've already into the breach dashed everyone forwards, and they have everyone 6 inches forward straight away because they were across the deployment line, and there they are, and they go, right, I've got my leader here. Well, there's no objective for them to go to, there's no one for them to shoot, but I feel like I have to do something with them, so I'm just going to move them forwards and try and find somewhere for them to go. And then because they're moving them towards the end or whatever, they put them in a position which is then exposed, or they haven't really thought about it. And the leader never needed to go forwards at all, right? But they just did it because they didn't want to waste an activation, and they pushed this guy into a position which then meant they were in threat range, right? And so inadvertently, suddenly, because you're scared of just doing nothing, like you end up in a scenario where you inadvertently expose yourself to danger. And sort of the way that people should view the board is, the further you get up the board, generically, the more threat range you're in, and therefore the greater the danger of you losing that model, right? So as you cross over from your territory into your opponent's territory, you know that the chances are that model isn't coming back alive, and that's just something you sort of need to sort of accept as you increase that risk with that model. So if you don't need to do that, then on that first turning point, then don't. It's perfectly acceptable to hold back. The next thing I'd say is like focusing on making threats and making mission plays possible. So a lot of the times I want a model to do one of two things, or both at the same time. I want a model to pose a threat to my opponent, or I want it to be able to play the mission. And potentially, where it's most optimal, I want to be able to pose a threat to both my opponent's models and my opponent's ability to score VP. So, when I'm looking at where I want to position my model, I don't need to go any further forwards, really, than the range I need to reach their objectives, or the range I need to reach the terrain in which I'm expecting them to have models on those objectives or key threats or key models, right? So when I'm setting up these ranges, what I'm looking at is, let's say I have a team that moves 6 inches, all right? So I want to have a model that can move 6 inches, and with that move, arrive at my opponent's objective, and it can be, just by the way, like a hair's breadth onto it is ideal. I don't want to be able to arrive the far side of my opponent's objective, whatever, but I want to be able to arrive my opponent's objective to be able to steal that point if needs be. Or, well, where their barricade is or where the terrain is on that objective, I need to be able to arrive within 2 inches of it, so that if they're against that, seeking cover, I'm then going to be able to hit them and shoot them. Or my charge range is going to be able to reach that point, right? So I'm going to look at this, and each of my models, I'm going to think to myself, is this model here to threaten this enemy model? Is it here to threaten this objective? Am I just going to APL bully this objective and steal it whatever they do? Or am I, so like, how are you planning to do damage to your opponent? Is it by removing models? Is it by removing or stealing their VP? And then think about where you're placing your model to achieve that outcome. Because you could potentially position your guy really far up the board, right? Like, and you can go, oh yeah, with my 6-inch move, I can be 2 inches beyond your objective. And that's all well and good, but if you're trying to just play loot and you need to sit on the objective anyway, well, you're now significantly further up in a dangerous position for yourself, where you're more exposed, and therefore you're more likely to die before you get to achieve your threat, right? So this is like I think how you do threat ranging. As I said, there's various ways that you want to think about that. One is how you move forward onto objectives, and one is how you move forward and deny your opponent scoring objectives, either by killing their models or by killing their sort of their threats before they can do the same to you. So this is kind of like the to and from, right? Is you need to have someone that's going to move up and grab an objective turn one, and then you need to have someone that's in range of either your opponent's objective or your own objective, and you have this sort of like mission play, mission threat, and actual threat to threat play as well. So that's kind of, I think, how you want to set up a turning point one. And what I will often say is, like, people will talk about counter punches quite a lot, and that's really where you have someone who's a lot further back, who's not necessarily, who but by positioning alone is completely unable to be hit, right? But let's say it's a melee model. Well, maybe they are 8 inches behind your model, or 7 inches behind your model, right? So your model is 7 inches in front of you, but you know that if your opponent charges that model and gets within 1 inch, you can then charge them back and kill them subsequently, right? So it gives you, that's a counterpunch, right? So it's like, you have to commit and come all the way over to me, and if you do, you're going to be in range of my guy, who's going to pick you up and kill you afterwards. So that's kind of like the way that I'm looking at that sort of positioning. So on turning point one, I think that's the sort of the mentality as you go forwards, right? So forcing people to when they get into that start of turning point two, you have the ability to threaten their primary or their models, because if they hold too far back, that's absolutely fine. Like, they're too far away, well, I'm going to take your primary from you, and that's all I care about. This is particularly on loot, right? Start the turning point, these guys are going to go forwards, they're going to steal your primary, and I'm happy. Or if it's capture or secure, end of the turning point, I'm going to move forwards, steal your primary, and I'm happy, because you're too far away to deal with me. So you want to have your models that are going to deal with their models that are going to reach their primaries, and then models that are ideally going to either provide you mission play or counterpunch, right? So, and that's kind of like the sort of the sequencing going forwards that I'm thinking about in my mind when I do this sort of turn one setup. And then going into turning point two, really what I'm doing is making sure that with these threats each time, I'm trying to do maximum VP exchange. So if I can, let's say, get my eliminate guard target that's also route and also still a primary point for my opponent, so that I go up one and they go down one, well, potentially that's 4 VP in a single action. If I have a choice of that one, or I have a choice of just going and killing a guy for eliminate guards, well, I'm going to go, well, you know what, I'm going to go for the 4 VP, swing over the 1 VP. Or let's say I have a mission action that I can do that's going to be a 2-point swing, I get a point, my opponent loses a point, or I can get 2 tac ops. Well, maybe I'm like, well, what turning point is it? Is it turning point? Is it the last turning point for me to be able to achieve these tac ops, or is it the first turning point? Is is this like how far away are we from the primary already between us? How many tack ups have my opponent scored? Like, what's the relative value of this right now? And that's kind of where I'm making those decisions to then decide which of these various threats that I've set up I'm going to go for. So that's kind of like the mentality. And then when you position them, again, like when you're positioning models during Turning Point 2, I think you want to go, all right, so where am I going to move right now to, again, either threaten primary this turn or like threaten primary the next turn. So whenever you're moving a model, I think you want to measure out, if you can, like the next turn's move as well. So it's like I'm going to move here and shoot this guy. By doing so, I'm now within 6 inches of this objective. I'm now within 6 inches of this objective. And so long as you have multiple models that can reach objectives every turning point, then whatever your opponent does, it doesn't really matter too much because you know that you're going to be able to reach the objectives. So all of your movement really needs to be focused on moving in such a way where you can, at the end of the day, make it to an objective and affect the VP, because that's, again, where the game is won or lost, right? So, and that's why teams like, I think Felgor do so well, because they have the movement potential and durability to sit on an objective of their own and concurrently threaten your primary, and they can do that from conceal on their objective, and they don't really need to play any other game, right? It's like, I'm going to wait for you to make a decision, and you have to come here and kill me, and by the way, you can't do that in a single activation, so if you do, I'm going to trade up and kill you here, and if you don't, I'm going to move on to your objective and then make that the problem on your point. And so that's why I think that those teams sort of do really well. So from a movement point of view, I think that's kind of like what I want to be measuring. Is I want to be measuring to my opponent's models, and I want to be measuring to my opponent's objectives. And if you're doing that routinely, I think you'll usually find yourself in the right place. And then there's really like this sort of more finite skill, which is probably a topic for another time, which is risk balancing between being able to reach an objective and reach a model and be safe, right? Because that's the next bit that's to move on from it. But hopefully that's a quick answer, and then maybe we'll talk about risk balancing and how I prioritize those VP versus model threats and mission play in another question, another episode. All right, that's been an hour and a half, so I think I'm gonna call it there. Because that's been a good little session. Hopefully you've enjoyed that. If you have Patreon priority questions that you want answering, then feel free to join up to Patreon and shoot your questions on in, and I'll take them all on there. Additionally, there is obviously the Discord for patrons where you can ask your questions, and the community will go ahead and answer them as well. So I hope that's been of some use, and I'll see you all next time. That brings us in this episode. Hopefully you found something new or useful while listening. If you did, throwing us a like would be greatly appreciated, and share this with your friends so they can benefit as well. If you want to make sure you don't miss any episodes, make sure to hit subscribe and select the bell icon so you get notifications as soon as the next episode drops. It really is the best way to help a small channel like ours. If you can't wait and you do want early access, you can join the Patreon, where you get exclusive access to all of our content ahead of time, as well as exclusive videos, access to the Discord, and tournament rewards. If you are an existing patron, let me take this moment once again to say a massive thank you for your support. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so drop a comment below and we'll get right to you. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host Ryan, this has been Turning Point Tactics, and we'll see you next time.